Well, this list is a little behind. Okay, well, 5 months behind to be precise, but it's been kind of a busy beginning of the year. And there's only so much procrastinating I can do before it begins to annoy the fuck out of me. So here is a very late list of the best games of the year 2018. I'm not generally into the survival explory games, but there is something about Subnautica that kept getting me to keep playing it, despite all the frustrating moments when getting mauled by giant fish or having game-breaking glitches where the items I sorely needed to continue the game would keep falling through the land environment, making me have to start over. But I still had a really good time with the game, and exploring was inherently fun, and it wasn't randomly generated, which I really appreciate for every time I had to restart this game. So, for being a genuinely good idea, I'm giving 10th best to Subnautica. Ninth best is a game I actually wouldn't have even tried if it hadn't showed up on the Xbox Live Game Pass, allowing me to try it for free. But Bomber Crew's micromanaging of a crew of men, on, of course, a bomber, as the name would suggest, nice and straightforward there, is rather engaging. Having to move your little people around to make them man different areas of the bomber without having quite enough people to man everything. For those of you who are really into games like FTL, you'll certainly enjoy this. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice took what would normally be a rather generic, third-person, counter-centric hack-and-slash and added the unique selling point of mental illness, giving the character a little more depth. The game is definitely better enjoyed with headphones, is where it sounds like the voices are actually coming out of the back of your own head. The game's a little surreal and hard to follow at times, and it's very short, but it's well worth your time. I'm not even going to front about this one. Call of Cthulhu from this year was an absolute mess. It boasted an RPG system that didn't really do anything, there was no replayability, and the story nonsenses a little bit, and the character models are kind of laughable. But despite all of this, I still really wanted to get to the end of the game to see what was going to happen. And despite the game having 4 endings, one of which you could only possibly know about if you looked it up beforehand, I was still engaged enough in the mystery of what was going to happen to try to get to the end, even if that mystery was rather disappointing. And this game can absolutely thank its lucky stars it didn't come out in a more interesting year, or it definitely would have made it onto the bad games list. In our never-ending search for a Left 4 Dead 3 that will never come, this year gave us the quite interesting Strange Brigade. Really all it is a third-person version of Left 4 Dead, but with mummies in ancient Egypt instead of downtown metropolises and zombies. But it also adds a very Indiana Jones running narration like you're watching an old newsreel from the 20s, which also gives it a little bit of charm. The game is certainly a lot more fun with friends, as the game doesn't actually populate with bots if you're playing all by yourself like the lonely sado you might be. But with World War Z having come out in 2019, I think it's safe to say that everyone is looking for some sort of Left 4 Dead 3, since we're never going to get one from Valve now that they've turned into a bunch of greedy fucks sitting on top of Steam, refusing to do any work on the service whatsoever, and are now about as creatively bankrupt as Pablo Picasso after going on a massive drinking binge and having 3 lobotomies. South Park: The Fractured But Whole isn't as good as The Stick of Truth, but I've always appreciated Matt and Trey for always pushing societal norms and poking fun at the hypocrisy they see around them, which South Park: The Fractured But Whole does wonderfully, all to kind of parodying all the comic book movies that have been coming out lately. So, if you're a fan of this kind of offensive humor, or are just looking for something Final Fantasy-esque, I would definitely recommend this. On every list, I like to have at least one game that I find cathartic, and this year it's going to be Guns, Gore, and Cannoli 2. If for no other reason, then I was a pretty big fan of the first one. I like the little hand-drawn style, and a side-scrolling platformer, zombie shooter with ridiculous weapons, kind of an odd plot, and in this one, Nazis, which is not even remotely new for games, but it still provides the right blend of simplicity and colorful violence that I sometimes seek out when I need to get away from some of the more puzzly or thought-provoking games. Now, my third best game came as even a surprise for me, because I generally avoid games that even look like this one. I actually cannot stand anime. I can't stand JRPGs. I can't stand awkward characters with big eyes and angsty stories, and this game was bleeding that out in droves in the first 30 minutes. But I think it was the gameplay that saved it. The need to come up with clever tactics and a kind of pseudo real-time turn-based strategy game actually was a lot more fun than I gave it credit for, and there really aren't a lot of games like this, so it is unique enough that I kept playing, and I'll be damned, by the end of it I wasn't pretty invested in the characters, even if it had that same awkward anime quirkiness to all of them, and they all seemed to be younger than the age of 20. But I'll let that slide this time and say I would definitely recommend playing this if you're into strategy games. My second game is one I was actually introduced to by one of my roommates, and I'm definitely glad I gave it a go. I'm going to be cheating on my second entry a little bit by making it 2 games, but they're games made by the same creator, and I appreciate them both for the same reason, and they were released pretty close to each other, so I don't feel all that bad in doing this. Psychotics Agatha Knife and Psychotics Mechanica are both games that I really enjoyed, for really the fact that I really enjoy games that are offensive. I enjoy humor that is offensive. Anything that's going to be pissing off some conservative, religious, right-wing nutcase really makes me happy. And in the first hour of Agatha Knife, they have lampooned the hell out of religion. And at that point, I wanted to keep playing to see what line they were going to cross next. And yet, much to my surprise by the end of the game, they had never really crossed the line of good taste. So, for being a game that employs genuine offensive humor in a rather tasteful way, I would absolutely recommend these games. But keep in mind, you must definitely like old school, find the item for the right puzzle kind of puzzle games, and it is very simple animation, but I feel this makes the game all the better. My number 1 game is also a little bit of a cheat. Banner Saga 3 came out in the year 2018, and I had been very looking forward to it as the end of this trilogy. But I'm going to make it the entire Banner Saga trilogy they put out on disc is the whole number 1 entry. I always appreciated how these games took a very tight narrative-driven focus, with choices that could have very far-reaching consequences, added a beautiful hand-drawn art style to it, wrote some characters who are engaging, though a few of them are a little cut out, and they found a way to innovate the gameplay every single game, so it didn't grow stale. Admittedly, the third game does suffer from a little bit of a pacing problem, as the story events have to kind of rush to their conclusion due to where the second game left off. But from front to back, all 3 of the Banner Saga games were the kind of games I wish the industry would make a lot more of. Every time I hear that single-player games are dead, I look at something like this and just laugh my ass off. Because the industry that said that, which is now obsessed with microtransaction, loot boxes, and fucking people out of as much money as they can, really don't have a clue what's going on in the industry anymore, and this game, to me, is absolute proof. Though I'll never forgive everyone I gave this game to as a Christmas present to try to get them to play it, not one of them has even finished the first game. I know who you are.